Beyond the Himalayas is a legendary land, a region with many names, a crossroads of opposing cultures. Silk Road caravans braved its fierce deserts and high mountain passes. Ancient kingdoms lie buried here, and colorful customs still survive. It has been called the natural home of the gods. Hidden for 50 years behind the closed doors of Maoist China, it is a secret place. For 6 weeks, the Central Asia Cultural Expedition has endured the blinding heat and dust of the Taklamakan Desert in western China. Now, entering Tibet, it faces a very different challenge. Surrounded by the world's highest mountains, Tibet is isolated by its geography, and until recently almost impossible for travelers to reach. Tibet is perched atop a 3-mile-high plateau. After 400 miles of steep ascent, the modern road levels off at the Tanggula Pass in the Kunlun Shan Mountains. It has reached a height of 15,000 feet, the average flying altitude of a small plane. There is no higher road anywhere on Earth. The thin air can cause dizziness. Nausea and aching limbs are also common complaints. But for Major Hari Ahluwalia, who organized the expedition, these are nothing new. Hari was a young officer in the Indian Army when he climbed Everest in 1965. He was a member of the first Indian team to scale the mountain and among the earliest climbers to reach the summit. Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru gave him India's coveted Arjun Award, and his countrymen hailed him as a national hero. Within 2 months, Hari was wounded in combat along the India-Pakistan border and permanently disabled. Nonetheless, he continued a life of travel and adventure. In Beijing, he met the president of the Disabled Federation, himself confined to a wheelchair.
My friend was also the son of China's former leader, Deng Xiaoping, and well placed to fulfill my ambition of returning once more to Mount Everest. As a result, our expedition was allowed to travel and record the most sensitive areas of western China, even inside Tibet. The Tibetan Plateau is a landmass roughly the size of Europe, a continent in the sky. Tibet is the desert people's word for a distant, unknown land. It has long fired the imagination of romantic travelers, its very name a siren call for exploration. From the end of the last century, a succession of remarkable characters risked their lives in the hope of reaching the forbidden city of Lhasa. Most of them never made it. In 1902, the Swedish explorer Sven Hedin tried to reach Lhasa with 2 Indian surveyors. Disguised as Mongolian pilgrims, the 3 men were mapping the unknown region in secret. They were quickly discovered, however, and turned back by an ambassador of the Dalai Lama. But others soon followed, and not all of them were men. There was Annie Taylor, the fearless Christian missionary. Susie Reinhardt, whose baby died in the snow. And Alexandra David Neal, the first European woman to become a Tibetan Lama. Her books contain accounts of paranormal phenomena which many people dismissed as too fantastic to be believed. But she was an acute observer of local customs and one of the first travelers to give an accurate picture of the unusual way of life here. The long-haired yak is unique to Tibet, the only cattle able to breed at this altitude. It was once the nation's main asset, providing most of its food, clothing, and transportation. Today, a new road connects Tibet to mainland China. It's the lifeblood of the present economy. The whole country now depends on the goods and services it brings in. The road is a triumph of modern engineering, yet it requires an army of road workers to keep it open, especially in winter. But its original purpose was strictly military. It was the means by which Mao Zedong gained control of Tibet and turned it into a region of communist China. Nachu reflects the new reality of the last 40 years. A Tibetan market town filled with Chinese storefronts and bicycles and long-haired tribesmen who arrive with their yaks to play games of American pool. The local school board is celebrating 4 decades of communist education, and the children's marching band is waiting for the big parade to begin. The Tibetans began marching to a new tune soon after the Chinese took over in 1950. Communism promised a modern world order. It spoke of equality, progress, and freedom from oppression. But China also had a new set of marching orders. Their leader, Mao Zedong, wanted to sweep away the cobwebs of history and tradition. Tibet was different from China. What would the new order mean to this remote land so long isolated from the world? Clearly, not everything has changed here. On the way to Lhasa, we discover a Buddhist pilgrim doing full-length prostrations every few feet, in the age-old manner of those who seek spiritual enlightenment. The practice originated in India, but one rarely sees it today. Is he making a pilgrimage to the capital some 200 miles away, or to a shrine nearby? Further down the road, we find a large Shorten, a holy shrine which often contains the relics of a Buddhist saint. Few countries have embraced their faith as completely as Tibet. It's a society with a deep religious core affecting every aspect of daily life. We see our first yak caravan. I am delighted that the Chinese road has not yet eclipsed this traditional mode of travel. Clearly, Tibet, like India, has different layers to its economy, with older ways of life persisting in parallel with the modern infrastructure. Like elsewhere, the traditional lifestyles tend to survive longest in the countryside. Rising 1,000 feet above the floor of Lhasa's river valley is the Potala Palace, home of the god kings of Tibet. Perched atop an isolated crag in the center of the city, it can be seen for miles around. For 13 centuries, Tibet was ruled by a religious hierarchy of lamas or priests, headed by the Dalai Lama. This 1,000-room fortress functioned as the nerve center of the country, the seat of both religious and political power. In the early part of this century, Tibet was still governed with all the pomp and ceremony of a feudal kingdom. To the first European visitors, it was like stepping into a medieval costume drama in which all the actors were real-life characters. When British envoy Basil Gould took this home movie in 1936, he could not have known that he was recording the last images of an ancient society, destined to disappear within a few years of his visit. For Westerners, this was still Shangri-La, a land of magic and mystery, where impossible things happened and a person's fondest dreams might come true. He even captured the present Dalai Lama as a child being led on horseback in a grand procession. But the ancient world of Tibet was coming rapidly to its end. Today, the Dalai Lama lives in exile in India. His palace, the Potala, is eerily silent. We find floor upon floor of empty rooms and corridors. This was his inner sanctum, a place reserved for the most important lamas, high officials and visitors of state. The palace was twice saved from destruction, once after the invasion of 1950 and again during China's Cultural Revolution in the 1960s. But its surprisingly good state of repair cannot dispel an air of sadness. It's a museum now, no longer animated by its former energy and purpose. The Potala Palace was once a beehive of activity, where treaties were signed, holy ceremonies held, and all the main decisions taken for the nation. There were 10 to 12 festivals a year. Lhasa's population of 20,000 increased fivefold during the celebration of the Great Prayer, which began with the New Year and lasted for a full 3 weeks. It was a prayer for the good of humanity and the whole of the animal kingdom, and included a special blessing for the happiness of the people of Tibet. Today, Lhasa is a city with two faces. It has two populations which inhabit different worlds but share the same time and space. On the same street, we find a Chinese restaurant with tinted glass windows, its publicity copied from the pages of Vogue, and the familiar sights of any Tibetan town. An old woman with her prayer beads, and a cow wandering in search of its owner. And there are pilgrims spinning metal wheels and repeating the all-powerful invocation to the Buddha, Om Mani Padme Hum, hail jewel in the lotus. A group of young street musicians offer us some light entertainment at the base of the Potala. Places of worship provide a lively focus of activity for young and old alike. There's nothing pious or gloomy about the Tibetan's faith. Here, the secular and the sacred seem to merge effortlessly into one another. A constant stream of pilgrims crank the prayer drums that line the palace walls. Each turn of the wheel is a prayer offered up for the benefit of mankind. For the children, they serve as shiny, endlessly rotating toys. When Tibet was ruled by its monasteries, which overlooked every town and settlement, about 1/5 of the population were celibate monks. Boys became monks as early as 7 years old, but only the brightest became scholarly lamas. Children have a special place in Tibetan life, for any one of them might be the spirit of some venerable old lama returned to the world in a new body. Whenever a Dalai Lama dies, a search begins for his new reincarnation. The chosen one must possess certain physical attributes and mystical qualities which will distinguish him from ordinary mortals. These include the ability to identify the belongings of his predecessor or previous self. Reincarnated lamas are almost always discovered in humble households rather than the noble ones. The cynical might say that this is deliberate, to avoid one family claiming an inherited right to the title. But I prefer to believe otherwise. Are not the humble in every tradition the ones whose hearts are open to the suffering of others? Drepung, Tibet's largest monastery, once contained over 10,000 monks. Each new Dalai Lama was trained here to assume his role as leader of the nation. Today, a sense of desolation hangs over the empty squares and buildings. In recent years, the authorities have allowed a few monks to return, but they seem almost invisible. We are ushered into a temple protected by the symbolic figure of a heavenly warrior. By contrast, a faded image of Chairman Mao recalls the terrifying days of China's Cultural Revolution. This is the temple in Drepung where Dalai Lamas were traditionally received. In this more tolerant time, the artists are busy repairing the damage done by Mao's Red Guards in the 1960s. Modern murals are repainted in the classical style, often replicating the destroyed pictures down to the last detail. According to Buddhist tradition, the universe is created and destroyed and recreated again in an endless cycle. A newly painted Buddha sits on his throne surrounded by symbolic deities. Among them is the multi-headed Chinrezi, the bodhisattva of compassion. The Dalai Lama is believed to be his living incarnation. Most Tibetans are still hoping that the Dalai Lama will one day return home. Across the valley, on a beautiful crescent-shaped ridge, is Ganden. This is the oldest and most sacred monastery of the Yellow Hats, the priestly sect to which all Dalai Lamas belong. A stronghold of Tibetan resistance, it was taken by assault in 1959. For many days, Chinese troops bombarded the hill with heavy artillery. By the time the Lamas of Ganden surrendered, there was little left of the monastery, except its charred foundations. Even in Ganden, the spirit of renewal is apparent. Local Tibetans are rebuilding it in their spare time, and 200 monks are rumored to have taken up residence again. They may be no more visible here than they were in Drepung, but for the Tibetans, their presence must be a hopeful sign for the future. Nor Bulinka means jewel park. It was the Dalai Lama's summer residence, Lhasa's version of a health spa. The Dalai Lama's move from the Potala palace to Nor Bulinka was the occasion for a splendid annual procession of lamas, priests and soldiers. The God King was moved on a hidden throne from one palace to another, while the people of Lhasa celebrated the arrival of the new season. In their effort to supplant Tibet's feudal kingdom, the Chinese renamed Nor Bulinka the People's Park. But there are very few people about. I find a solitary gatekeeper in an empty courtyard and offer him a cigarette. In return, he tells me a story. 2 summer pavilions stand on a small island in the middle of an artificial lake, now empty. The lake was fed by a natural spring and would recede in winter. The Chinese, unaware of this fact, poured concrete into the basin and pumped new water into it. In spite of all their efforts, the new water continued to seep away, leaving the basin dry, and the natural spring never returned. If I had to invent an allegory for China's failure to understand Tibet, I could not improve on the gatekeeper's simple tale. We are invited to see a Tibetan hospital in Lhasa. The Chinese tried to destroy the old religious order in Tibet, eager to replace it with a newer communist model. But they were sufficiently impressed by Tibetan medicine to preserve its practice. It was first introduced into Tibet by India in the 1st century BC. Later, it was enriched by Chinese medicines and a large number of remedies unique to the Himalayas. The oral traditions of Indian Ayurvedic medicine, many of which have been lost over the centuries, are still preserved in the pictures and scrolls found in this room. Tibetan medical theory evolved from many sources, but the greatest influence of all was exerted by Tibet's native genius, Yutuk Gampo. Intricate paintings catalogue over 84,000 physical conditions. They cover everything from anatomy, pathology, and embryology to diagnosis and treatment. Yet throughout the texts, the emphasis is placed on the well-being of the whole patient rather than on the particular disease. In Tibet, medicine and religion are closely related. The Buddha himself compared his teaching to the healing of the sick. If a man is shot by a poisoned arrow, said the Buddha, he should not ask who shot it or why, but quickly remove the arrow so that the wound may start to heal. The Barkor is the old quarter of Lhasa, containing Tibet's oldest temple. It's both a sacred site and a busy marketplace. Day and night, visitors circle clockwise round the temple along narrow streets crammed with shops and market stalls. Some pilgrims choose the more strenuous, full prostration, measuring their progress round the circuit with the length of their body. Either way, it counts as an act of devotion and a means of washing away the sins of the past. Jokang Temple is regarded as the spiritual heart of Tibet and the best place to purify one's karma. The idea of karma is basic to Buddhist teaching. Every human act has its consequence, whether in this life or the next, including prayer. The prayers of a devout pilgrim can counter the harmful effects of past actions and encourage a wiser approach to the present. The Jokang was built in the 7th century for the Buddhist wives of Songten Gampo, a barbarian king who had married into the royal houses of both China and Nepal. The two princesses converted the king to Buddhism and started the remarkable transformation of this fierce, warring tribe into one of the gentlest people on earth. The inner courtyard of the Jokang is a monastic cloister where young monks train in the art of spiritual debate. What at first I take to be a violent argument turns out to be no more than a good-natured contest of wits. But monks were subjected to real violence, even in the Jokang temple. The Chinese regarded Lamaism as an enemy of the communist ideology. Religion was outlawed. Temples and monasteries were closed or demolished. Lamas and monks were defrocked and forcibly re-educated. From 1959 to 1978, the Chinese ruthlessly suppressed religion in Tibet, persecuting its people and destroying much of its culture in the process. But violence failed to undermine Tibet's faith. And since Mao's death, China has adopted a more moderate approach. Religious persecution leaves deep scars and a strong desire for freedom. But the Tibetans are traditionally a peaceful people, and one can only hope that they will never have to suffer such pain and devastation again. The Buddha once told his disciple Sariputra, "With joy in what is lovely, wisdom led, put to flight these troubles here." Is Tibet already following his advice, I wonder? The weather changes rapidly as we head west. The thin air cannot hold the sun's heat, so the temperature plunges as soon as clouds appear. Even though we are traveling in the middle of summer, it's much harder going than I expected. The high altitude and great distances are taking their toll. A hot sandstorm turns without warning into a cold blizzard. a driving rain follows on its heels. In Tibet, they say, you can experience all 4 seasons in a single day. Later, the sky clears, and it's warm again. The Lhasa River has turned into the Yalong Tsangpo, Tibet's principal waterway. I have met it many times before under different names. At this point, it's the highest river in the world and justly called Tsangpo, the mighty one. Dropping 11,000 feet to the Indian plains, it becomes known as the great Brahmaputra, son of Brahma, the creator. It then merges with the Ganges and follows on into the Bay of Bengal, where it takes the feminine name of Jamuna, goddess of fertility and rebirth. Tibetans observe their own fertility rituals. Planting festivals mark the beginning of the warm weather and are heralded with music and much fanfare. The villagers parade in traditional costume. The women carry their picnic baskets on their backs. Horseback riding and swordsmanship are both on display, and grandfathers demonstrate ancient skills to the younger generations. The season for growing crops is brief and often uncertain. Riders will deposit the first seeds into the earth at a gallop, an acrobatic performance designed to assure a good harvest. Shigatse is the country's second largest city. It lies in a broad, fertile valley in the center of Tibet. At the western tip of Shigatse, beneath Mount Del Mare, stands the great monastery of Tashilhunpo. It was once the home of the Panchen Lama, Tibet's second holy leader. When the Panchen Lama dies, there is a search for a child who's thought to be his reincarnation, just as with the Dalai Lama. If there was no adult Dalai Lama, the Panchen Lama would rule in his place, so that Tibet would always be governed by one or the other, but times have changed. 50 years ago, Tashilhunpo ruled the whole of western Tibet with the help of 4,000 monks in 4 separate colleges, each with its own abbot. Today, it's no more than a tourist attraction, with more camera-wielding Chinese than Tibetan lamas. Shigatse has changed too. Like Lhasa, the city has grown dramatically. There are modern suburbs, military camps, and an increasing number of permanent Chinese immigrants. If this wholesale transfer of population continues, the Tibetans may soon become a minority people in their own country. The Chinese were not the first foreigners to break through the walls of this distant, self-contained world. That distinction belongs to the British. Gyantse lies at the head of the Nianshu Valley along the old caravan route from India and Nepal. For centuries, it traded in wool, Tibet's main export, and served as its gateway to the outside world. It also lay in the direct path of any invasion from the south. The Dzong, or fortress of Gyantse, had always managed to withstand attacks from India and Nepal. But in 1904, it finally succumbed to the British Raj. Their commander was Colonel Francis Younghusband, an imperial adventurer who turned his diplomatic mission into a full-scale military invasion. In a series of one-sided battles, the British overpowered the Tibetans at Gyantse. The antique muskets and magic charms of the Tibetans were no match for the superior firepower of the British Raj. In one 4-minute battle, 700 Tibetans were massacred. The rest walked away from the battlefield in sorrow and disbelief. Young husband pressed on to Lhasa. He entered the forbidden city in full dress uniform, accompanied by a marching band. The inhabitants shouted and clapped. Young husband was delighted, unaware that this hero's welcome was actually the Tibetans' way of driving out evil spirits. The Dalai Lama fled to Mongolia, so young husband signed a friendship treaty with his messenger and withdrew, leaving a trade mission in Gyantse. If the experience undermined the Tibetans' faith in their magic charms, it served to encourage the mystic in young husband. He resigned from the army and devoted the rest of his life to good works. Eventually, he founded the World Congress of Faiths. Young husband was not a Buddhist, but he may well have been entranced, as I am, by the Polkor Chodey monastery. Founded in 1351, it once housed 1,000 monks. The 17 monks who now inhabit it pass a large part of each day reciting tantric verses in the chanting hall. Meditation and prayer begin early, and the monks, fortified by a constant supply of hot butter tea, go on for many hours. Above the chanting hall, the sound of the monks' voices is echoed by the songs of the workers repairing its roof. Once again, I'm struck by the closeness of religion and daily life in Tibet. There seems to be no division between the prayers resounding inside and the restoration work progressing on the outside. Even for the average Tibetan, life is a spiritual journey whose final aim is liberation from the sorrows of the world. The cosmic symbol of this journey is the mountain. It rises from the lowest rungs of hell to the highest peaks of wisdom. Kumbum Temple is a striking expression of this cosmic mountain. A multi-tiered pagoda, it contains 20 chapels, each dominated by a protective deity and painted with elaborate murals. Pilgrims progress through all of them, ascending the pagoda in a symbolic journey toward deliverance. The journey may take many lives to complete, but the starting point is always the present moment, from wherever one happens to be on the mountain. The dome is being restored, and much of it is hidden beneath the scaffolding. But finally, I discover what I have been looking for, the fabled all-seeing, beneficent eyes. In India, these are placed on cars and boats, as well as temples, to ward off accidents and other misfortunes.
We have kept 2 days at the base camp of Everest. If it is going to be bad, then I think we should advance our
Sadly, the Buddhist eyes have not been able to protect me against my own misfortune. The altitude has affected me badly, and I will not be able to continue as far as the Himalayas. It's a big disappointment, but I'm grateful to have gotten this far. After a few words of advice to my companions, I say farewell and wish them good luck on the final leg to Everest. The high passes of Tibet are always decorated with prayer flags. They are like open-air cathedrals where the faithful give thanks and pay homage to the natural wonders around them. When truck drivers reach the top of a pass, they always stop to perform the blessing for a safe journey. They stand by the flags, clutching a handful of sacred verses, which they then release into the wind. Watching these blessings float off to the 4 corners of the earth, I feel that the mountains are so near, I could reach out and touch them. The expedition stops at the grandly named Everest View Hotel, a small inn with a typical Tibetan kitchen serving noodles and butter tea. They talk to a young Sherpa who refers to Mount Everest as Chomolungma, Mother Goddess of the world.
The Himalayas are like a monastery. The birds who come to the mountains are like the monks and nuns. The flowers are like the tinkling bells and symbols of the chanting hall. What does Chomolungma represent? For the outsider, it is simply a mountain peak to conquer, but she is the mother of the world. The whiteness of Chomolungma can be compared to the purity of the enlightened heart and mind. At the foot of Chomolungma is a valley called Rongborang. There used to be many wild animals, like the snow lion and snow leopard. Because of this high altitude and solitude, there are many caves and places of meditation where ascetics have been in retreat for years.
Rongbuk Monastery stands on an isolated cliffside in full view of Mount Everest. At 16,500 feet, it's the highest spiritual retreat in the world. This is where we will camp for the night. The monastery was destroyed during the Cultural Revolution, and for years its ruins were little more than a rubbish dump for mountain climbers. Now there's a new stupa and a sufficient number of restored buildings to offer basic shelter and tea for travelers like ourselves. The first Everest expeditions all departed from Rongbuk Monastery. They were organized by none other than the conqueror of Tibet, Francis Younghusband, now president of the Royal Geographical Society. By the 1920s, the summit of Everest had replaced Lhasa as the supreme goal of romantic travelers, and Younghusband regarded the scaling of its heights as the ultimate challenge. The Tibetans, however, had a different perspective. Chomolungma was a sacred place, and to disturb its mountain spirits was believed to be a dangerous blasphemy. The monks tried hard to dissuade the first climbers, but without success. The 1922 expedition included John Noel and George Mallory, considered to be the best climber of his day. They made 3 separate assaults, but the mission was aborted when an avalanche killed 7 Sherpas. The Rongbuk Lama performed a religious ceremony in memory of the dead Tibetans. One of the rituals was intended to deal with the bad karma the men had accumulated by attempting the climb. A second expedition was mounted in 1924. Armed with champagne, tins of quail in aspic, steel bottles of oxygen, and leather waistcoats, they set off in the snow. Mallory and his young companion, Andrew Irvin, were nearing the top when John Noel, filming them from below, lost sight of them. Other members of their party were driven back by blizzards, but they did not return, and their bodies were never found. Young husband was convinced that they had reached the summit and died on the return journey. One will never know. For the Rongbuk Lama, the mother goddess had demanded 2 more human sacrifices. For the rest of the world, Mallory and Irvin had shown that the mountain could be conquered. 8 more expeditions attempted the north face of Everest before World War II. All were defeated. On 29th of May 1953, the New Zealander Edmund Hillary and his Sherpa Tenzing Norgay finally reached the top from Nepal. They were followed by the Swiss, the Chinese, and the Americans. And in 1965, by our own team of 9 Indians, which included my friend Indra Singh Rawat.
On the same rope with me were 2 other men, Fuldorji, who is buried under the snow somewhere up there, and Hari, who has been disabled forever. I remember sharing my flask of tea with Hari at the 4th base camp. He said it was the best tea he had ever tasted. We were hit by an avalanche. It covered the entire camp, and we lost our supply of oxygen. We didn't know what to do. But the next morning, Fuldorji and Hari and I dug about in the snow until we found the bottles again. It was a miracle. We were young, and we had a tremendous amount of energy.
This is the valley of Milarepa, Tibet's great nature poet and its most beloved saint. The northern land of the world is Tibet, whence the doctrine of Buddha will spread. The summit of sky-touching snow is matchless in sight, without equal. The sun and the moon turning round its peak, a meditation radiating wisdom and compassion. Here Milarepa is said to have achieved perfect enlightenment, his example inspiring countless generations of lamas from the 11th century until today. He's famous for his songs of illumination, but when his disciple Gampopa asked for his last instructions, Milarepa replied, "What is needed is more effort, not more teachings." Then he lifted his cotton robe to reveal buttocks hardened by long years of meditating on a bare rock. That's my last instruction, heart son, he said. Do it. To the question, why climb a mountain, the famous mountaineer Mallory is supposed to have answered, because it is there. A good answer, but I wonder if it is quite complete. The experience is not only physical, it is also intensely emotional and even spiritual. The physical act of climbing a mountain has a kinship with the ascent of that inward spiritual mountain which everyone has to climb sometime or the other. But whether the mountain you climb is physical or spiritual, the climb will change you. It will teach you much about you and the world.